Can we bring our first panel up on stage? This panel is about the future of industry. It's about the future of your organization and the policies shaping and supporting them to get the skills that you need to get. So please welcome William Bosang. He's Assistant Director in the Department of Further and Higher Education Research, Innovation and Science, with the responsibility for further education, training, apprenticeship skills, and tertiary education policy. Claire McGee, who is Head of Education and Innovation Policy for IBEC. Dave Hegarty is a partner at Indicon, Ireland's leading independent economic research and consultancy organisation. Dave was also Assistant Secretary at the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment, as the Minister was saying there. I'm Patricia Quain, who is Chairperson of the Expert Group for Future Skills Need for the biopharma industry. So a fantastic panel, I hope you'll agree. Let's start off with you, William, if you don't mind. From a broad perspective, why are we here today? Why is this event so important?
Well, I was reflecting before I came over, and certainly this setting reinforces the reflection going back to, and the Minister was picking up on his remarks. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when The Economist in 1988 talked about Ireland being the poorest of the rich. And if you project forward now to 2023, 25 years later, the transformation that has happened. And we can talk about all the different reasons why that has happened in terms of the single European market, foreign investment, our tax regime has obviously helped, but underlying all of it is skills. Without the skills and the human capital that's driven the transformation of this country, reaching back to the introduction of free education in 1968, the movement into the sort of massification of participation in tertiary education subsequently, that's been the engine for our economy. But I think, the reinvention theme is a really important one to reflect on, because what has brought us to where we are, and I think Orla picked up on it really well in her remarks, isn't going to use the phrase, Jonathan, future-proof us for the future. So the EU Year of Skills, which has been referenced, it's a bit of a peculiar thing because it starts in the middle of the year and it runs on into the middle of the next year. And I suppose at European level, what it reflects is an understanding that the European economy as a whole is very challenged, globally in terms of its positioning relative to other economic blocs, unless it engages and really comes to grips with the challenges that are there. I was at the OECD last week talking to colleagues from other member states about skills issues. It was remarkable the extent to which the challenges we see here are shared. So what the EU Year of Skills, I think, is telling us, and it's an issue I think that plays out importantly for us in Ireland. We talk about policies like, and really important government priorities like decarbonisation, like digitalisation, like housing for all. And I mean, there's no doubt about it in talking to colleagues in other government departments, when we get into those issues, there's a discussion on skills. Yeah. But skills sometimes tends to be the add-on to the discussion. Somebody says, of course, there's the skills issues that arise. Now, you're out there, many of you in the world, dealing with the day-to-day challenges of ensuring that we have the work that you have, the workforces you need to be successful. So, I mean, and I'll maybe wrap up to allow the thing to move on. I do want to mention, and Orla already referenced it, the OECD review of our skills strategy, because that was a really important work, I suppose, reaching back to the point I made about reinventing, that highlighted that what we've done in the past isn't going to have us fit for purpose for the future. Now, the OECD is full of very measured and balanced people, so they're going to present that in language that's nuanced. But there were some very stark, I think, findings in that report, which was that a step change in Ireland's skills system is in the OECD's view, essential to position us for those challenges. And the OECD can always contextualize this in terms of the 3Ds, demographic change, population aging. That's going to have a major impact on our skills requirements. Digitization and, of course, AI. Sulis, as recently, going back to 2020, talked about almost 900,000 people that were at high or medium risk of disruption from automation. You add AI into that, and you can really get a sense of the challenges that are there. They also talk then about decarbonisation and the transformation of our economy that will need to give rise to, and the skills implications of that. And as we get into the discussion, I hope we get the opportunity, and David would be really expert on this, in talking about what nationally we've added to the OECD's 3Ds. And that's the concept of deglobalisation. And it sounds like jargon, but it's a really important theme in highlighting how we need to double down on our sources of competitive advantage, in particular our skills. So I hope we'll get into that as we get into the discussion this morning. But maybe I'll sort of conclude my first contribution just on that point. The importance of skills in ensuring that we're positioned to deal with the economic, the social and the environmental sustainability challenges that are there for all of us. And it's great to have an opportunity to engage collectively. Like it's government, it's higher education, further education, and in particular, it's the enterprise sector because it's only, and I think it's a really important theme of the OECD review, it's only by all those parties working together that we're going to be able to get to where we need to get to in terms of skills and human capital.
You mentioned that, this is a thing that was really important to Europe. Is there another bloc that is doing much better than us when it comes to addressing the needs for these new skills, and where this is not as much of an issue? I was speaking to Lars in the green room earlier, and he was saying the clients he was speaking, it seems to be very much across Europe from what he was speaking. What about America? What about APAC?
Yeah, I would be very surprised if it was the case that any country says that it's cracked the skills agenda.
Yeah.
I think some countries have, and from what I've seen, so it's impressionistic and it's anecdotal. They adopt an approach where they're more structured and systematic in their approach to skills policy, and that was one of the recommendations that came through to us from the OECD. The need to put a better structure, to use the technical term, a better governance around our skills system, and in particular, to ensure that when we're discussing skills policy issues, it's not a case that you just have, government, I'd like to think government officials can play their part, but it's not just a case of officials from government departments, public servants from agencies and providers discussing what the future of the skills system needs to be. There needs to be a much broader reach out into the economy, into the society, to engage with everybody in that dialogue and in that process of co-design.
Yeah.
That is the way that's going to make our plans, it's going to help make our plans successful.
Absolutely, and it's from having conversations, it seems to be Ireland, compared to other countries in Europe, doesn't compare as favorably when it comes to really embedding lifelong learning and skills within in organizations. We just don't seem to have that sort of a culture, it seems, but maybe that's changing. David, tell me a little bit about what influence having the right skills can have an impact on an industry or an economy.
Thanks, Jonathan, and delighted to be here. I think William has stolen some of my best lines, but anyway, that's forgivable. Right. I think, when I think about what I would have worked on in the department, overall enterprise policy or industrial policies, as it's sometimes called, the white paper on enterprise published at the end of last year, as William has said, set out a number of core objectives around helping the industrial sector embrace decarbonisation, digitalisation, growing our Irish exporting sector, and some other objectives. So if you think about what are the critical enablers of that, I think skills is probably the most important one. So it's not an objective.
Is it particularly important for Ireland as opposed to other European countries?
It is, I think, for a number of reasons, Jonathan. I think firstly, and William kind of touched on this, globalization is changing. The type of world economy, the way it's evolving, is not necessarily to the advantage of countries like Ireland, which are very much export-oriented. So we see rising kind of protectionist tendencies. countries like the United States, China, bigger EU countries like France and Germany, a much more kind of dirigiste approach to industrial policy, subsidization. We can't, so that's going to be a more difficult environment for us going forward. So we have to, we have to double down, I think, on some of our core advantages and enablers. I think skills is absolutely central to that. In the past, maybe taxation was seen as an important lever of industrial policy. It's not unimportant, but again, there, Minister Richmond touched on this. We're much more constrained in what we can do in that area now going forward. So I see skills as absolutely essential to the achievement of our enterprise policy goals around decarbonisation, digitalisation. And critically, and the one I would really call out is, if you look at, we have something in Ireland of a dual economy, very highly profitable, highly productive multinational sector, and then maybe an SME sector which is characterised by a more sluggish productivity performance. And the kind of critical challenge, I think, for our economy is trying to not so much close that gap, but improving the performance of our Irish-owned firms. And that really, we have to work on things like management quality, and again, that brings us back to skills. So, ultimately, and kind of William touched on this, and I know, because I've worked with William for many years in the department, that there is this tendency that, I suppose, in government, that in a way, skills is always the answer to every problem. But actually, I think it is in a way. So, and I've had this discussion with William before. So, absolutely critical, and will be even more critical going forward, I think.
Ireland, I think, internationally is seen as this, this knowledge economy, very skills focused, high level of education. We have to remember that wasn't always the case, and that may, if we don't keep up this investment in skills, if we don't keep that high level output, that could shift. I mean, are there other countries that are very much positioning themselves in that space and trying to attract the same sort of skills, FDI, that Ireland has done? And are there credible threats out there?
I mean, I think there are threats, maybe putting it too strongly. I think, our model, the Irish model, has kind of been, there have been various efforts to imitate it by some of the, certainly the new countries that joined, they're not new anymore, that joined the European Union in 2004. So they have tried to imitate some of our elements of our model. I think, when I was in the department, the types of countries we always look to, so we consider Ireland to be a small advanced economy. So we looked at economies like Denmark, Finland, which is particularly strong performer in the quality of its education system.
And
Singapore,
also was quite forward thinking with that AI
absolutely.
program that they rolled out, an
Absolutely.
AI program that almost what was it, 1% of the entire country did a course on AI, yeah?
That's right, an online course. Countries like Singapore, Israel, maybe even New Zealand, different kind of economy. So Switzerland, those are the kind of economies we would have looked to when we were developing the white paper on enterprise policy last year. We actually commissioned a piece of work from somebody who specialises in looking at the characteristics of small advanced economies, and those were the kind of countries that were in focus. Now, it's not as though I think we need to be careful. It's not as though you used the word threat, Jonathan, but
I like a bit of drama. That's
that's fine. But I think the biggest worry I always have or had in the department is we have to avoid complacency, I think. And some of the things we got wrong in the past, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, were because perhaps of a degree of complacency. So small advanced economies always have to be alert and agile and thinking about what's coming around the corner at us and being nimble in our response. And trying to anticipate and be proactive in putting in place the policies that kind of will, going to use that word again, future-proof.
Right. Patricia, at the expert group for Future Skills Need, you did a piece of research, and you might take us through what you were looking at, why you were looking at it, and what you found.
Yeah. Well, the Expert Group for Future Skills Needs was founded in 1997, and it's tasked with advising the government on what the future skills for not only biopharma, which is the one that I'm involved in, but for employment, and identifying what are the labour issues, what are the skills needs, and then that gives the government the foundation on which to develop and work with educators or whatever else is required to meet those needs. So in that expert group, there are many there are government departments, there are the educators, there's business, there's unions, there's quite a big group. But the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment are tasked with doing the research and preparing the report. And they then, what they have done is form a committee and along with some consultants to do the granular work. So that committee, I'm chairing that committee, but the committee itself is very strong. It's got people from the department, Biopharmachem Ireland, all the education authorities, industry. There was Pfizer, Novartis, Chanel, APC, say all the educators. You had a wide range of Innopharma were actually very proactively involved as well. And then a study is done, and that has been going on for the last year. But it is very granular, quantitative and qualitative. And really, at this stage, we're almost at the end. The report will be then submitted to the National Skills Forum, and then that will be delivered to government and published. And all I can say is, this, I expect that it will be finished in the next month or two and published, that you be sure to get your hands on it, because I hear at other things, we should do a skills map of this and we should look at what's needed. It's done. This is a very comprehensive study. It's like 100 pages. It's got the statistics in it. It's got the future. It's estimating what numbers are going to be needed. It's looking at the existing courses, what's needed in the future. So it will be a very valuable report. So make a note, everyone, for the biopharma, which I'm specifically involved in, that will be, you can use that as a working document to guide you on what you're going to need up to 2027. But in a nutshell, I suppose a few of the key things that are coming out is, there was interviews and there was workshops, etc. Data skills. So an example was, up to now, you're hiring a chemist and you think, chemistry laboratory, on the bench, doing all of that. But what was very clear now is, we just don't need only a chemist, we need a chemist who understands AI and who can interpret data and have statistical capabilities that they know, because they are not going to be. The automation is coming in at such a speed that the bench that you traditionally see a chemist working on a bench and with amazing equipment, the bench will be automated. The benches are now have robotic little arms weighing and moving and measuring and doing all of that. But at the end of the day, the data that's coming out is the critical data about the drug. So the chemist needs to understand that. So there are new skills. So the people providing the skills at the educator side need to build that into their courses, and that's what we're telling them, and that's what they're engaging with us and understanding what they need to do. And hopefully government will fund the type of laboratory equipment for universities and for research to move to this level. We can't keep, our universities and with old equipment when everyone else, the industry, is working with new equipment. So data was a big thing. You need engineers. You still need the traditional type roles, but with different skills. So you need an engineer who can, build a digital twin, because that's the future. So we saw a lot of that, and that's all identified. And the other thing that came out very strongly was that companies are looking for skills like critical thinking, problem solving, communication, being able to interpret and discuss, and that needs to be brought in more in the education side as well. So there's 9 or 10 key recommendations that are all, and the good thing is they're not only recommendations, but there's action plans, there's people assigned to take the actions, and there's time limits. So it's a very comprehensive plan and report. The other thing that's coming out in it as well is obviously the upskilling. You've got all the existing people in the companies, but you can't leave them behind. It's not all just the new people coming in. So you need to upskill. So whether that's through new courses, in-house courses, short courses, or whatever methodology, but it is really important. It's a huge, I think it's like, 50% of your existing workforces need new sets of skills, completely new sets of skills.
Wow.
So it's really significant. But I'd be very positive, because I've seen both sides of it now. I've seen the educators' involvement and their work, and I obviously have seen a lot of the employer side. And it's happening. It's how to bring them all together and what it's going to take. But I'd be very positive is that the mantra of, skills, and we're not going to have enough for employees, and we're not going to have the skills. I think that's wrong mantra to have out there. I think we've huge capability. There's a lot of work, but it needs involvement and engagement.
Do you think that, and we're tapping into maybe the second session a little bit here, but do you think that organizations understand very well the roles that they need? Because there's a lot of buzzwords out there at the moment, we need an AI specialist, or we need a data scientist, or we need all that sort of stuff.
No. In a nutshell, I think organizations and companies need to do and engage a whole lot more and understand a whole lot more of what they need. One of the things we came across quite a lot was in between all the interviews and everything was data skills. Everyone was looking for data skills. Now, I remember maybe, I suppose it's 7 or 8 years ago now, when this data skills started to come out, that, we're going to need data skills. And I think there was about 1 or 2 courses that got traction at the beginning. And now I believe there's 300 and something, 20 courses doing nothing but data skills. But in your companies, if you are, and I guess most of you here today are looking and considering skills, do you or the people that are in the relevant departments actually understand what that means in relation to your companies? Like, what kind of data skills do you need? That's a very broad term. Are you looking for digital skills? Are you looking for a data scientist or a data analyst? They're different. Are you looking for digital transformation? What level? Do you want, there's a difference between digitalization, digital transformation. And what we found was, when you started probing, saying, what do you need?
What's the thing that you want them to do?
What do you want? Yeah, but they need to...
They know that, but they don't know what
they need to understand, what am I really looking for?
Yeah.
What kind of data, and what is the skill? And that's kind of the same with all the positions. It's relative to your company. What do you really understand what you need and what are you going after? When you go looking for an employee, or a graduate or a program, do you know what the courses out there are on offer? You know, I found that I've been so impressed with what is on offer from the education side, and how much the educators have moved forward with trying to improve the courses and bring technology into the courses. But then you go to the employer and you say, well, did you consider getting somebody from this course or this company, or, you know, that is providing courses? And they don't, you know, people don't know. They're going with the traditional, oh, we always got ours from College X. But I would say now you need to challenge that College X to see, have they moved? Are they engaging? Because not everyone is engaging.
Yeah.
And you need to be at these events, you need to be, you know, when it comes to doing these studies, you know, did the companies get involved? Were they coming running saying, yeah, we want to be there to say what the future skills needs? No, we had to drag teeth to get people engaging.
Yeah.
Some companies are always there, but some never appear. And then they can be the ones that will say, oh, skills, future skills needs, no, we don't have them, etc.
Yeah.
I think we just need to be very careful.
Okay.
I do believe we have the capability.
So, I mean, is that your experience, Claire? Do you feel that, you know, IBEC members from industries maybe outside of pharma and life sciences, do they have this still, this awareness of the skills gap, and what is being perceived as coming down the future? Do they know that's happening?
I think the big challenge for business at the moment is nobody knows really what's coming down the future. So 10 years ago, would we have been speaking around to the level of we're speaking around sustainability and climate action? Perhaps not. So, and it's the pace of change that's coming with digitalization. So nobody really has a degree of certainty around what the future of work is going to look like, what the jobs are going to look. So we all have to kind of take bets on that a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think,
I suppose one of the challenges is that those, you know, previously you could be a bit more broad, you know, and now, you know, you need very specific. If you pick the wrong path.
yeah, and that's, I think back to, I'd love to place or a slide back up around some of those recommendations that the report has identified, because that's around that agile pathway into learning is very important. Patricia makes a really key point here around how enterprise looks internally at itself to be able then to project externally and to find those skills. It actually takes a very specific skill to know what you need for the future. And maybe some of the larger companies who have a very organized talent management strategy that's very closely linked to their business strategy can do that because they have the capability internally and they have the relationships. Let's think back of the SME base that the minister referred to. They don't have that capacity internally. And that's why the collaboration with the system, why we need to have sharp investment around supporting those companies to be able to look to the future and say, well, this is my business strategy. How do I link skills in with that to be able to deliver on their business mission into the future and solve that? So I like David's point around skills really is the answer to everything, because it is going to be what is the key differentiator for Ireland. We don't have that, you know, based on the countries you listed out, they all had very kind of either natural resources or very other different specific resources that we don't tap into. So how do we then make sure that we are prioritising what our competitive advantage is, which we know is talent and collaboration. So how do we then incentivise that collaboration between the public sector, between the education and training system, and then between enterprise? And that's the beauty, or that's the sweet spot, I think, that Ireland has. And one other point that struck me while we were having this conversation around how do we build that culture for lifelong learning, we must not forget what's happening actually at primary and secondary level when we're thinking to the future here. We're very much focused, obviously, for today's discussion around upscaling for the workforce. But at the moment, there's a major project underway around the redevelopment of senior cycle, so the Leaving Cert. How is that going to change to be fit for the 21st century? We need to be making sure that the people who are involved in developing that are listening to these types of conversations. So things like demographic change, digitalization, decarbonisation, deglobalisation are concepts and terms and transversal skills that are familiar to every student across the base, not just to prepare them for the world of work, but actually just for the society that they're going to live in. So I think that's incredibly important, that we're really cultivating that culture of learning, continuous learning, so that we can all move through multiple careers into multiple different industry sectors throughout our lives. And that's a huge opportunity. But that's perhaps a different conference, but I think it's an important one, that as industry, that we are constantly focused on education as a continuum. I think the real other critical point for Ireland at the moment, we have 2.6 million people in work. So 75,000 new jobs by 2028 that was identified in the Innofarma report. Where is that talent going to come from? And therefore, companies are going to have to look internally to see how can they retrain, reskill, upskill people who are currently on their factory floor, in their lab bench, in their sales and marketing teams, and to be able to have the skills that they're going to need into the future. And that is going to require really laser sharp focus then between the education and training system, between enterprise, and then funding through the system, be it the National Training Fund or very specific funding programs, to be able to make sure that those programs are put in place to upskill people very rapidly and very quickly. I think it's probably a bit too much of an ask that the education system can deliver everything on its own. It's too much of an ask then for industry to be able to deal with those challenges on their own. So that collaboration is key. The other thing I would also say to this sector in particular is you're not alone. I've just come from another discussion with large energy users who are grappling and who will be, in the first kind of front line of defence around climate action and charged with delivering on the climate action plan. They're still grappling with how do we get the skills in to do this. So you're going to be competing with those businesses too around talent in this agenda. So maybe a bit more sharing of information around skills and how we can actually collectively together solve some of those challenges.
You said large companies can, develop these training and upskilling programs to meet their future needs. Are they doing that, and are they looking far enough ahead in the future, in your experience?
I think so. I think a lot of companies are trying really hard in this space, and one thing they've realised is when they do support employees and workers to actually upskill, you can see the acceleration in those people's careers, which is phenomenal actually. They move very quickly into different roles, and I think that builds resilience within the organisation. It gives them confidence. It also gives the individual confidence and builds resilience. We can always do more. What you see probably now is larger companies build very strategic partnerships with certain partners within the education and training system, so be that across multiple aspects. Maybe they're developing an apprenticeship program, they might be developing a leadership capability program, they might have engagement in a technology centre or in a research centre. So they're kind of connecting the dots around the system. That's quite positive. But then back to David's point around the SME base and that kind of more sluggish productivity. How do we then bring in those companies to be able to share in some of that bigger wisdom and experience that those larger companies have that they've then brought into Ireland? So it's the sharing of minds and sharing of information, I think, is what we need to crack still.
Your questions from the floor are very welcome. Raise your hand and we can start cracking those, because there might be a lot of those. Please do raise your hand, we'll get to them. But Claire, presumably it's much cheaper to do that internally than, to hire from within than to start the whole process of going out and externally finding someone.
Yeah, but I think
so it makes sense, economic sense.
Absolutely. I think there's like a 20% value of the person you bring in versus the person you've already sitting there. So it makes sense, and I think it's always about building resilience for the Irish economy. I think William outlined it very well. Look at the transformation we've had over the last 40 years. And our challenge now is to kind of make sure that we continue to have that continued transformation all the time into higher order activity, that we're constantly moving up the value chain. That's what's going to be critical to Ireland, that we're not just that many of these biopharma companies or the medtech companies or the food companies, if we're still doing the same thing in 5 years' time, that's a problem for Ireland, that's a problem for Irish society, that's a problem for our Irish economy. And how do we continually push up that value chain?
Yeah.
And that's a collective push, I would suggest.
William?
Yeah, there's a couple of points I'd like to pick up on. I mean, I first met David many years ago when we were in the economic forecasting game. And as I say, economic forecasting is difficult, especially about the future. But going to what was always said, if we were any good at it, we'd be in yachts in the Bahamas rather than sitting in the Department of Finance. But anyway, going to Patricia's point, ESRI are doing some very interesting work for us at the moment in terms of identifying the specific skills that businesses are looking for, and like very much in line with this trend that you hear about a skills-first approach to recruitment, moving beyond credentials, because if everybody's got a 2-1, how do you differentiate between who's good for you and who may not be? And what they did was very interesting, and they'll be publishing it, I think, early next year, scraped a large number of LinkedIn ads in terms of people looking for to recruit in AI, in blockchain, in automation. And there's a lot of really good intelligence in a specific and a granular way as to the skills that were required. So, I'm a public servant, I'm a civil servant. I know there's business people in the audience, and I can imagine how busy it is to be running a business, and the time and attention that you can give to trying to determine what skills you might need in 3, 5 or 10 years' time, and whether you'd be recruiting over that time horizon anyway is moot. But from the work that the ESRI did, businesses do know the skills that they're looking for, or at least those that were advertising on LinkedIn with those very detailed specifications of what they needed. The lifelong learning and that question that was being posed around how we landed, how we strengthened it. I mean, one of the large measure, and it's an important part of the OECD report, is about barriers to lifelong learning. And I'm very interested really in reflecting back to Orla's presentation at the outset about the need for short, focused, stackable kind of programs that align with people's lifestyles, because there's an appetite for lifelong learning, but the lifestyle isn't, people's lifestyle just isn't consistent with it. I mean, I am always impressed when you see people going off to do 2-year master's programs or whatever, with all the kind of caring or family responsibilities that they have. When you look at how far behind we are in lifelong learning, we're 13% as opposed to, let's say, Sweden and Finland, well over 30. We really need to, up our game on lifelong learning.
Yeah.
And part of what the OECD highlights and what other countries talk about, and IBEC often talk about it, it's the whole issue of incentivization. And there was a small allocation in the budget in 24, €1 million for a pathfinder, for a pilot project, to look at how we structure incentivization scheme for SMEs. Because, and it's a personal view, I don't see how we're going to make up the kind of gap or get to where we need to be in terms of reskilling and upskilling into that 2.6 million people that are in the workforce, unless we provide a framework within which businesses, and particularly small businesses, engage in. And I've stolen your thunder, Claire, because I think the IBEC.
I'm just delighted someone's listening to what I have to say about industry incentivization. That's worked with him, because it's true. I mean, I don't mean to interrupt you, but just specifically on the industry incentivization. You can really mark out large companies who have the capacity, the time, the space to be able to backfill for it, and they provide, I suppose, maybe the training leave and the time for their staff to be able to do it. If you're a small business where you're managing multiple different projects, multiple different time scales and time objectives, where do you get the capacity and the time to be able to stop that, to be able to do upskilling and training? Because if you're not working, you're not being paid, therefore then your people are not being paid.
Yeah.
So then you're not performing. And that's literally the choice that those organizations have. Supply chains might put additional pressures on those, so large companies push back onto smaller companies to be able to deliver on other areas, so they have to upskill. So therefore we need incentivization schemes to be able to help those companies either pay for the cost of training or to support them in the backfill of the work, so that they can still continue to complete orders, to complete, to make sure that that's happening. And as well, the training programs have to be delivered in such a way that they can be done in a really quick and agile and responsive and up-to-date way, so that they can do it. So we can talk about skills, but how do we really incentivize the industry to go on that journey is incredibly important.
William, did you wanted to finish up there, because I want to get to Dave there. Did you have anything else you want to ask?
Yeah.
Dave, just some comments on what we've heard, and then I wanted to ask you a little bit about transversal skills, and we talk a lot about digital skills and technical skills, but actually a lot of the time we also really need to think about these, and maybe they're just put in a different category. So just your comments on what we've heard, and then why is everyone talking about transversal skills at the moment?
Sure. Thanks, Sean. Just in terms of what I've heard, I mean, I agree very much with everything that's been said. I think with William's point, I think we need to look maybe at the flexibility of how we provide some of these opportunities in the area of lifelong learning and otherwise. And I also agree very strongly with Claire's kind of remarks earlier about this challenge has to be approached in a way that brings together the state, industry, and indeed individuals themselves. You know what I mean? So it can't be tackled by any one actor acting on their own. And it's very important that industry is part of that discussion. And obviously, I think there's no doubt that industry is ready to be part of those discussions. On the transversal skills, I mean, I think, maybe just stepping back from that a bit, the point I'd kind of make is that, people will often say to you, what are the growth industries of the future? Where does Ireland need to position itself? Probably the honest answer to that is we don't know,
Yeah.
So the key thing is that we have a skills base that kind of enables us to be flexible to respond to whatever opportunities emerge. So that's why I think transversal skills, because they're skills that can be used in any occupation.
Yeah.
That's why I see them as being particularly important. Now, there are some obvious areas, we've touched on them already in the discussion. We face an enormous challenge in decarbonising our economy. Probably one I think that people don't really realise the extent of change that's going to bring about. So that's an obvious area. I think, I think it was 3 years ago, when I was in the department, we produced an AI strategy. And in a way, at that point, we were kind of saying things to ourselves like, well, look, this AI is probably close to a tipping point. But actually now the tipping point has happened,
Yeah.
So, again, that has obvious implications for our skill provision. Now, I know the EGFSN that Patricia has been participating in, has done some work in that area as well.
Yeah, I want to hear about that in a bit, but is the government doing anything for this? Because it seems like transversal skills are obviously really useful, but are employers sort of interested in them when they need those technical skills as well? But is the government doing anything to sort of help with
maybe
those?
If I could come in on this, and I don't know, maybe that somebody here from DCU today, I mean, one of the Human Capital Initiative projects, is, and sorry, you'd learn a lot more from that person in the audience than you would from me.
If we can get a microphone to this
You're undone.
unwilling participant, that would be fantastic. And just hear a little bit about it, if that's all right. Would you mind, sir, to tell me a little bit about it? Yeah, great. If we can get a microphone to them, please. Thanks. Just introduce yourself then, but maybe just your point, William, while we're getting that to them.
Yeah, it's just great to see a kind of certification of transversal skills by a higher education institution. So as Kieran will say, somebody comes to an employer and say, this is my transcript of the transversal skills that I have, if I understand that correctly. But Kieran will explain more.
Kieran, just introduce yourself, please, and maybe tell us a little bit about it, if that's okay. And sorry for putting you on the spot there.
Yeah. Hi. Good morning,
Try and
everyone.
advance your skills in action.
I wasn't expecting this. So my role in DCU, I'm the first transversal skills director in the world, I think. So I've been doing this job for about 2.5 years. It's been a very steep learning curve because there has been lots of examples of good practice, either nationally or internationally, but it's really around, I think it was Claire was talking about putting a structure on things, an infrastructure, and governance as well. So essentially my job is to identify skills that everyone should have, all students should have, regardless of what program they're studying, and then figure out how we can, in an authentic way, integrate them into programs in a way that they can be evidenced. So one of the really important things around transversal skills, and we could call them human skills, power skills, 21st century skills, the only term that I'm allergic to is soft skills, because the term soft has lots of negative connotations that really undervalues these skills. And when we look around the world and we see the problems that we face, in reality, these are not knowledge-based problems. They are stemming from a lack of critical thinking, ethical decision-making, leadership, intercultural competence, entrepreneurship, creative thinking, data literacy, etc., etc. So essentially, universities are slow to change, and the narrative in higher education has been you rarely see a university closing down, for example, and yet universities are facing into a time of massive disruption. So we need to ensure that we are future capable. And again, I don't use the word future proof because proofing against something implies that it's external to us, it acts upon us, we have a lack of agency, it's a threat of some sort. Whereas I don't want our students to think of the future like that, or that there's one simple future, there's multiple futures potentially. But essentially, what universities produce at the end, when we come through our university program, is a transcript, which is great, and we put it on our wall, and we take pictures with it. But it essentially lists the program that we've done and the modules that we've done, and that's it. It says nothing about the skills, and yet employers are screaming out for skills because these skills are social in nature, they're cultural. So I could say that I'm a really compelling communicator, or a really creative thinker, but ultimately it'll be you who decides that. So for me to self-report as a good communicator has very limited value. There is value insofar as I have a language to articulate myself around it, but fundamentally for an employer, the employer really needs to, it's a huge resource issue around hiring people, going through the process, etc. So what we're trying to do now is to ensure that our students graduate with the traditional transcript, because it is important and knowledge is important, and we're not trying to devalue knowledge, but that also students will graduate for the first time ever with a personalized transversal skills profile based upon skills that have been explicitly assessed within the program structures. So they're not exclusively self-reported. There will be a degree of self-reporting, and as I said, that is really important. But then when the graduate comes out and hands this personalized profile or shares the personal digital personalized profile with employers, the employer can see that this has been validated, it has been assessed formally within the program structures. But that does require a massive amount of heavy lifting, and sometimes we refer to it as like pushing honey up a hill. Like it can be really, really challenging because you're trying to change very established structures. But it's incredibly important work. And from talking with employers, and I deal a lot with William's department and Claire as well, working in higher education is a complete privilege, but it comes with a responsibility, and we have to listen to our stakeholders, which are the students and industry and society, and that's what we're trying to do through this project.
Thanks, Kieran. Very interesting, and if you look at everyone's LinkedIn landing page, they often list all of these transversal skills, but none of them are measurable. You can say I'm a fantastic communicator that's very focused on on leadership, but actually only until you test those in the lab, so to speak, do you actually see them. Is that something that you've seen, Patricia, that, you talked about all the skills that the pharmaceutical industry are looking for. Do they even mention transversal skills as what they really need?
Yeah, probably not.
Do they not? I mean, in that work that you've done, are they all focusing on data? We need this, and we need chemists who can do that.
I mean,
and so
they
on?
may request them, but kind of as you say, at the early stage, it's hard to determine, does somebody have them or not?
Yeah.
So I suppose, yeah, you can read about it, and people will say, oh, I have this, but do they? It's really when you get to know them, but it's fantastic to hear that it's being formally identified as a need, and that's exactly what's coming out in this report. That this kind of education needs to be done as an integral part of all the courses. But I think what was interesting is, like, everyone here, you can hear everyone needs the same thing. We're all talking about the skills, and you have the educators, and you have the small business and the large businesses. And I think what's really important is the collaboration, and kind of more formal collaboration is needed between the employers and the educators, or the people who are investigating what is needed, or the projects. Because how do the educators provide what the employer needs if there's not a formal path of engagement? You can't sit in your company and say, well, we need this. How is the educator meant to adapt their courses if you haven't joined to tell them?
Yeah.
So when InnoPharm or any of the universities or your local, education group come knocking on your door, actually it's really important that you do talk to them, because they can't imagine, how are they supposed to know what you need in the future? So that's one thing we're identifying, is that we're recommending that there should be a much more formal structure for collaboration between the educators and the industry.
Yeah. I'd love to get your questions, so if you have comments on what we've had, we have a microphone over here, and I'll get to you, Claire, in a second. So thanks very much. You can also use the hashtag, which, if I can find it here, is Unleashing Talent 2023 if you're on social. Share your thoughts on what you're hearing. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, just to introduce myself, I'm Paula Carney from Takeda Grange Castle. So I'm 25 years in industry, but also I was 5 years lecturing. So I'm loving hearing what you're saying, Patricia, because this is one of our major gaps that we have with our students coming in from colleges across Ireland, is that they've never heard of a change control, they've never heard of a deviation, they've never heard of a CAPA, they don't know the problem if you're not filling in paperwork properly, which is all our data integrity issues. So, we've obviously, some colleges have reached out to us and have asked us already to help with their validation and, put in a module on this, because in order to protect our license to operate, the first time people come to our company, they're 22, 23, very niche in Grange Castle in that we're high potency API, but also stem cell. So we're seen at the moment currently with the HPRA as the most critical site in Ireland, because it's very manual process. It's not a terminal sterilisation, it's product to patient within 72 hours. So it's really, really critical that the operators do that right. So what we're seeing, and I have a 21-year-old myself, and I know, if we were all to take a moment to step back to when we're 21, GMP, good manufacturing practice, who is the patient? Is this your mother, your brother, your sister, your child? It's getting into that mindset that we have to have. And I would love to see those modules in our 18 to 22, 23-year-old people in any science program across the country. What I love about InnoPharma, and we use InnoPharma a lot and we can talk for panel 2 and panel 3, obviously, on upskilling and lifelong learning, but you know, at that point, people are in industry, you know, there are adults, you know, maybe 5, 10 years want to go from level 7, level 8, level 9. They've gone through the torture of closing a deviation. They've gone through, you know, the change control, why, you know, you're after manufacturing in a non-validated state. What I'm feeling with our younger people who are so eager and so enthusiastic and they want to learn, they just don't see the risk. So that is just my...
Risk is boring sometimes, you know.
What?
Risk is boring until it goes horribly wrong.
Well, not really, because, you know, it's your patient. So,
No, I mean, that's how it's perceived.
yeah, but like one big gap for me as well is that like you've people coming into biopharma, they've never heard of Annex 1. They've never heard of the Udrelex guidelines. You know, that's manufacturer sterile product. It's like your Bible. Why is that? You know, and it's because obviously the courses, you know, it has to wait a timeline before they're revalidated. But that's, for me, a big, massive gap. I feel with the Innopharma courses, absolutely, they're doing the technical writing, they're doing, you know, quality systems modules, and you're understanding all of that, but it's just that little bit too late for our younger people.
Really interesting. Thanks very much for that. We have another question there in the middle table, if we can get. We might just add another roving mic there. So, Patricia, would you mind? Thanks, Dave.
Hi, thanks very much. I'm Anne-Marie Purcell from a company called Pharmalex, and I have a kind of project management and commercial role. And I just want to say I love what Kieran was talking about, because one of the things I often have to do is we have clients coming to us and they have a specific problem. Deviations is a good example. You know, they have a raft of deviations and they want us to provide consultants who can come in. And the big thing is I can look at my list of consultants and see all of their competencies. And I'm working in a very technical organisation with no technical chemistry skills. But I'm looking for people because I can get people who have certain skills. But will they suit that organisation? Will they be able to go in and influence that organisation? And I love the idea that I could get some sort of competence skills, and I'm never using that term soft skills again, because I think you're so right. It's so, especially as a project manager, you're often accused, oh, you've great soft skills. I think that is so important that we have people that you can have a gauge of their skills with people, their communication, data integrity as well, hugely important. So I love what that's doing there. I think that's brilliant.
Great, very good. Anyone else? Raise your hands, please. There's a question there at the back.
Jonathan, just while the mic is going
Yeah.
there, I think what our colleague here from Takeda has just outlined is the risk here that's involved if we don't have that dialogue between enterprise and education, is the fact that these are highly regulated industry sectors, and we need to make sure that we have a sharp focus on what's required to keep those companies as regulated, it is safe within those parameters, and ensuring that there is no risks around that. And I think that to me just completely articulated the challenge here and the risk here, that if we do not kind of crack that nut, then the whole kind of confidence in this whole industry is potentially unstable.
Absolutely, and in a high-stakes industry, you know, you've got a patient, which is obviously could be really tragic, but you also then have reputation. Microphone there at the back.
Hi, thanks a million. That's really interesting talk so far. My name is Nicola Rice. I'm one of the apprentices that the Minister was talking about earlier. I'm a level 10 professional doctor in engineering apprentice. I'm studying in the area of future skills identification, so this could not be more spot on today. I'm really eager to learn from the panel what particular specific proactive initiatives are there to upskill? What funding, do you feel like we're effectively accessing the National Training Fund? So what schemes are there, and are we accessing the fund properly? There's 2 billion there, are we using it?
Who wants to take that? I know we will be addressing that a bit more in the next panel, but do you want to take that? William.
Yeah, I mean, that's, and I'm sure Claire will add to this, Nicola, that's an ongoing, issue, an ongoing difficulty around the surplus in the National Training Fund. And the fact, notwithstanding, we talk about, and it was bound to pop up at some stage, we can, when we start talking about step changes, and when we identify the scale of the challenge that's there, That can't be done on a business as usual basis within existing resources. Now, resourcing decisions are made by the government. That's the democratic mandate they have. That's the function they serve. So as a civil servant, that's kind of nearly as much as I can say. The Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform announced at budget time that he was going to initiate a process to look at how the National Training Fund could be used in a way that supported reskilling and upskilling and the human capital development agenda that we have within the fiscal framework, within the budgetary framework. So that's the officialese around it, Nicola. I think Claire will have things to say about it. I did want to talk about, just very quickly, because I thought the contribution Nicola made on in talking about the risk management issues and the need for a workforce, and a workforce coming from the tertiary system that's equipped to deal with those challenges. The other side of the coin around that, I think it's important to reference, and it was in the OECD report in a very significant way. Innovation is driven by people working with technology. Sometimes we look at it in a very binary way. There's technology, and then we have to mold or reshape people to kind of realize the potential of technology. In fact, the other way around, all the evidence is that in terms of inventions, technological developments, it's the people working with them that have developed the skills to maximize their benefit. So just turning the question a little bit, Nicola, it's the idea of people coming in to your business with the capacity to work that system in a way that drives innovation in it. I think that's and that holds more broadly in terms of what we want, why we need skilled people in the workforce to drive up innovation and to drive up productivity.
So just one comment on that. Absolutely, when you depend on your product. So if, like as I mentioned, we have one plant that's API, one that's high potency, which is highly automated, which means it's clean in place, it's OEB level 5. You know, so it's all about risk to the operator as opposed to the patient. And we can, we can have all of the likes of our, training manuals are all, paperless at this point. Well, not all of them, but like a lot of our key steps in the process would be highly automated. But when you're looking at a stem cell facility, it's not like that. It's all about protecting the patient. It's been fully gowned. It's known what a grade A, B, C, D clean room is, why, you have to be validated to get into, you have to be qualified to get into the area, move really slowly, behave in a certain manner, spray your hands every few minutes. It's not easy for, an operator to be in that area, but things like in a sterile process, it is much more, and it's going to take a lot more time to automate that. I know you have things like robotics, and if you were maybe say, I came from another site that we were manufacturing IVF treatment, so it was 70,000 vials per batch, which means you can use your robotic arms, you can highly automate that with stoppering and everything else. But where, with your stopper, capping, etc. But if you're looking at, 4 vials per patient with 120 million cells in those, it's manual. There is no robot that's going to be able to come along. And what my point, I know the next panel and the following panel we're talking about other things, but if we were, we're constantly, and I want to talk about that as our, a unique selling point now for people is to have those digital skills. Power Automate, Power BI, absolutely amazing, because when linking it back to, we've deviations, change controls, everything on TrackWise, data integrity issues. If we can automate that, it saves a huge amount of time, because if you've got, what we're finding is that by not being automated enough, is that you could have 4 people across the site updating the same procedure, whereas the likes of your Power BI, Power Automate now, we can have one gatekeeper and take in all those changes that needed to be there. So it's not a one size fits all, and it's the same with what my piece, what I'll be talking about on upskilling, again, it's your audience. Or, if you're in project management 20 years and doing, you can move straight into doing advanced project management skills. Not if you're 22, 23 and you don't know what project management is. Like, one of our, we obviously have a challenge from above, one of our, is transformational goal over the next few years. But like, just to give you an example of what one younger person said about, we have a whole model on critical thinking. She turned around and said, well, I'd actually need to learn how to think as opposed to critically think. And we have to always remember, like a lot of us in the room are in the industry years, but please put ourselves back into a 22-year-old's mind.
Yeah. That would put me in some very unusual places, going back to my early 20s. I'm not willing to share with this group just yet. Maybe by the end of the day, but not just yet. Thanks very much for that contribution. Do we have any other questions for the floor? Because I do want. Oh, we're good. Got this very. We were hoping to get one or two. We've one there, and then we'll move on to our next panel. Go ahead.
Thanks. Joe Ledden is my name. I manage the Midwest Regional Skills Fora. I'm joined here today by my colleague John Costello, who manages the Midlands Regional Skills Fora. And I suppose it's very interesting conversation and discussion this morning around skills and talent. I just wanted to pick up on two things both Orla and Patricia referenced about the need for a platform or a fora, as the name suggests, for industry and education and training providers to work or collaborate together. That is the Regional Skills Fora. We were set up several years ago by the original Department of Education and Skills. More recently, the OECD report that William referenced identified the critical role that the Regional Skills Fora play. There's one in each region, 9 regions across the country. We have education and training providers at further ed and higher ed. We have statutory agencies including Enterprise Ireland, IDA and IBEC, but more importantly, we have industry across the various different industry sectors within the region. So we work very closely in terms of the identification of current and, more importantly, future skills needs. Where there's gaps there, we utilise funding models such as Springboard or the Human Capital Initiative that William referenced. We utilise funds such as Skills to Advance at the further education side. So those models, those funding models are utilised in terms of the identification, design, and more importantly, the delivery of new programmes to meet the training needs. And it's great to be here today because we work very closely as well with InnoPharma, particularly in the manufacturing and the medtech and life sciences area in terms of, again, funding models such as Springboard. So there is a platform there to strengthen links and to continue strengthening links between industry and education and training providers. It's your Regional Skills Fora. Thank you.
And just before you go, is most of the conversations that you're having at the moment, are they mostly with multinationals, or do you have a lot of engagement with SMEs?
No, well, if you look at it, again, I can speak in the context of the Midwest. We might have 30,000+ enterprises, 99% of them are SMEs, 92% are micro. So back to the backbone of the economy, the micro enterprise implying maybe 10 or less people, but 99% are SMEs. So the main focus of our work and our role would be with SMEs in the region. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much for that. We have one more question and then we'll wrap up our panel. Have been so good. There was one there somewhere in the middle, unless I'm hallucinating.
I have a microphone down here, actually.
Oh, do you? Okay, go ahead. Sorry, I can't see it.
Sorry.
There was these blinding lights in our eyes. I
no problem.
Go
So thank you so much to the panel this morning for all your contributions and your insights. My name is Adrienne Fleming. I am an academic from TU Dublin, but very invested in the pharma/biopharma industry through engagement with our professional bodies and also the wider network. I'm going to put a different hat on here, though, and talk as a parent. So I was really appreciative of Claire's insight there, or your comments there on the fact that it's so important to look at our primary and our secondary, because I think we have a lot to do there. And I say that because I suppose I see the cold face of the undergraduate then when they enter into college. And, my ambition for them is to, enhance their critical thinking, enhance their problem solving, enhance their decision making skills, make them, a global citizen effectively, the knowledge is so critical, and I'm very appreciative of the contributions from my colleague in DCU there on the transversal skills, because we're in the process as well in TU Dublin at looking at the importance of our graduate attributes and understanding that it's not just the parchment, it's, you know, what has to go with that for them to sell themselves to the industry as well. But coming back to the primary and secondary, I think there's a lot of work that we need to do there to ensure that actually we're supporting our future in terms of their skills.
Yeah, and go ahead.
Claire, I'm just wondering on that. I suppose you know how do we? Because I think we can talk very much about how we're doing our upskilling, our reskilling, and all that. But how are we really going to ensure that we keep that continuum of education current?
I think it's a really key point. I think you've articulated it so clearly, and that link, as you see it, as the undergraduate or as the Leaving Cert student transitions into further study, that's one of the problems. I think from an Irish, we break down every single problem and we deal with them perhaps in a little bit too much of a siloed approach. If we're really serious around talent, investment in people, investing in skills, it has to be a whole of government approach, and it has to be a whole of education approach. The moment, so that's why I was delighted to meet a level 10 apprentice actually, and to hear from that experience, because what we have at the moment is, when we think about apprentices, it's very much, it's over here in a particular kind of sector of the economy, and that's the further from the truth. And actually, it's great to meet Nicola and be an ambassador for what generation apprenticeship can actually do for people and for the industry. So therefore, we need to make sure that in every conversation we're having around skills, that it is linked to every single touch point across the education and training system, and that it can't be just very narrowly focused. Our game here is around improving our lifelong learning capacity, and we teach that we have to encourage that right through the education system. We can't just retrofit it in when we're at a mid-career point and we're looking for a career pivot ourselves. We have to be constantly on that quest, because the world is constantly changing. And my career over the last couple of years has been talking about the world of work is changing, but actually now just the world is changing, and you approach that very well around being a citizen. And if we think about how our organisations are gearing themselves up in terms of ESG, for example, they're transforming. You mentioned your transformation that's happening. So it's aligning all of those different areas together. So how can you do it on a practical level, not just as a parent through your parent-teacher meetings, but actually a big call to business here is the National Council for Curriculum and Assessment are going to go to consultation on numerous different specifications for Leaving Cert. Business Studies is going to be there, the science subjects are going to be there, transition year is going to be there, up for review and up for consultation. It's really important that business gets its message across around, and it only needs to be a paragraph, but send the message back into the system to say, we need people who have transversal skills. We need people who have the ability to think. We can then support them on training, but we need you within primary and secondary education to help them unlock that ability to learn, help them unlock that ability to kind of see themselves in the future world. And I think it's really important, if that opportunity comes to you, to take advantage of it, start those conversations. We can't just kind of fix the problem later on. We have to this is a collective, I think, ambition, and we need to do it. So I'd say watch from 2024 on. There's going to be a significant amount of opportunity to share your points around what should be on a reformed Leaving Cert. But actually, what does a new Leaving Cert look like? What does that mean? What does it mean for business? What does it mean for Ireland? Share your thoughts on that, even if it comes from a business perspective, the boardroom perspective, or a parenting perspective. It'd be really important to get that into the system, so that it's not just educators. With the greatest respect to every single educator, we can't just have the system speaking to the system. We need to make sure we have a really holistic approach to this, because the Leaving Cert, this is the first major change in 50 years.
Yeah.
Do we want to bake in another 50 years of rote learning, of not critical thinking, of not doing the right thing. So we have a responsibility, I think, as a business community to make sure that we show some leadership in this way. So I hope I haven't deviated the hope, but it's incredibly important that we don't miss this opportunity.
A really good point, Claire. And just this is a bit of a curveball, Dave, but like when we look at impact on the economy and looking thinking about future skills, do we take into account primary school at all? You can pass it across, Claire, if you want. Like, do we take into account, because obviously good quality primary and secondary education leads to obviously better success. We always say it's important to have good education, but is it quantified in any way? Do we look at primary and secondary school and say this is a really key focus of what's going to come?
We do, John. I think maybe we don't focus on it as much as we should, and I absolutely agree with Claire's shout out to people. People really need to engage in that process. It's absolutely extraordinary that even a certificate, the one I did, is still the one people are doing. Anyway, a kind of slightly frightening thought.
Yeah.
But there are these kind of indexes used by the OECD, the PISA scores. So there are some measures of how our education system compares with our OECD peers. William probably knows more about this than me, but I think overall we do okay, and I think we're improving, if I understand the numbers correctly. Now, those mainly related to, I think, kind of, people's attainments at around the age of 15, 16, really writing some. So there are some measures that we can use. But I kind of take your point that I suppose when I worked in the department, we tended to focus more on the tertiary sector, because I suppose we're looking at kind of it from an enterprise perspective. But I absolutely take the point that we need to look at this kind of on a whole of cycle basis.
Yeah, because it's just before tertiary is secondary. Really interesting. It looks like I'm going to have to wrestle the microphone from our panel. We've already gone an hour and 10 minutes. Did you want to say something very quickly on that, Patricia? Very quick now, please.
One thing is there's a lot of good work going on. Like you do have SkillsNet and regional skills and BPCI and InnoPharma, all the educators. There's a lot of work going on. And even when we talk about primary and secondary, there's lots of stuff going on to encourage STEM. But at the end of the day, you need industry and employers to engage, because they can't put on an event without you providing, some help and resources. So there's a lot of good stuff, there's a lot of studies, but there needs to be more collaboration and engagement from the people who need these skills.
Absolutely.
They have a role to play.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much to our fantastic panel. Really appreciate their time. William, Claire, Patricia, and Dave. Thanks very much, guys.